Let's say you need some cash and you need it right now, but you don't necessarily have the proper funds in your current bank account to do so, but you do have a credit card. In today's video, we're going to be going over what a cash advance is, if it's actually the best option to use in terms of borrowing money, and some other potential alternatives to go with in this type of a situation. Hi there, I'm JD with A Simple Dollar, where we believe that personal finance doesn't have to be complicated. In fact, our whole goal over here is just to provide you with the most relevant and up-to-date information concerning everything related to your money. So if that sounds good to you, be sure to give this video a like and consider subscribing to the channel for more content just like this. And while you're down there, feel free to check out everything in the description to see more helpful related content from our website, thesimpledollar.com. We actually did a full written article about this very topic and a bunch of others over there. So if you want to learn more about this particular subject, at the end of this video, check that out. But speaking of today's video, let's dive right into this thing. And I guess we'll start off by pretty much defining what a cash advance actually is. So a cash advance is basically a loan that's offered by your credit card. Most, if not all, credit cards allow you to borrow money up to a certain limit. Now these limits will vary depending on the card that you have, but they'll usually be lower than your overall credit limit. You can easily get cash advances at places like banks, ATMs, or even through convenience checks offered by your credit card provider. But are they really the best options to go with if you need cash in a pinch? And quite honestly, the answer to that question is a resounding no. Even though they might seem pretty easy and convenient to use, cash advances are among some of the most expensive ways to borrow money for a few major reasons. Number one, they often come with some pretty steep fees. They usually require the user to pay a pretty hefty upfront fee of around 5% of the overall transaction. And if you're using an ATM that's out of your network, you could potentially be spending even more on one. Number two, most credit cards charge higher than normal interest rates on their cash advances. So even if you're paying around 12 or 15% APR on your normal everyday purchases, you could be looking at paying an average of 24% on your next cash advance, which is honestly pretty high. And that's not all. With a normal credit card purchase, your provider usually gives you a grace period of around a month to pay it back before they start charging you interest. But with a cash advance, there's no grace period whatsoever. From the minute you take it out, that interest will start racking up. So to put all these ideas into perspective for you, let me give you an example. Let's say you're in a bind and you need $800 for a cash-only purchase. Maybe you're trying to purchase something off of Craigslist, or maybe even last-minute tickets to a Major League Baseball game. You decide to go with a cash advance, but in order to get it, you're gonna first have to fork over $40, which is 5% of the $800 transaction. And on top of that, from the moment the money hits your hands, the clock starts ticking on a 24.9% cash advance APR. And if that's not bad enough, let's say you can only afford to pay $50 a month to pay off that advance. In this case, you're looking at paying around $1,000 over the course of 20 months between principal and interest. And if you add those fees, you'll ultimately be paying $1,040 just to get your hands on a measly 800 bucks. So by now, I'm sure you're saying to yourself, okay, I get it, probably don't go with a cash advance, but if I need money now, what are some other options to go with? Well, there are plenty of other inexpensive ways out there to access or borrow money. And I guess the biggest thing to consider is maybe dipping into your emergency fund, depending on the situation, of course. Now, over here at The Simple Dollar, we highly recommend having an emergency fund. We've done a ton of content about this particular subject that we'll try to link down below in the description for you. But the idea here is just to have a 6-month cash reserve of around $1,000 locked up in a savings account. That way, in case something happens, you have something to fall back on. Now, clearly, getting last-minute tickets to the World Series probably shouldn't classify as an emergency. But in more dire circumstances, maybe the health of a loved one is in jeopardy, this is where the emergency fund would come into play over a cash advance. And speaking of loved ones, another option would simply be to borrow money from friends and family. You know, asking for a cash loan from your parents could hurt your pride a bit, but it's certainly better than the high interest and fees that you're gonna be facing with an everyday cash advance. Also, if you have a good relationship with your employer, you could ask for an advance on your next paycheck. Large corporations do have certain rules put in place as to how much you can actually borrow, and they might charge you a small fee for it. But for a small business, it might not even be a big deal at all to get an advance on your next paycheck. It's Best not to make it a habit though. And lastly, rather than getting a cash advance, you could get a personal loan from a bank or an online lender or even a credit union. There are all types of personal loans out there to choose from, but we recommend going the route of unsecured loans. Now, don't let the name scare you. Unsecured loans just means that they don't require any collateral for you to obtain, unlike a cash advance. The one downside with going this route is that you'll usually have to have above average credit to receive an unsecured loan with a reasonable interest rate from a reputable lender. However, credit unions in particular usually have a little more leeway with their lending criteria, so those places might be worth checking out as opposed to others. But if you've taken all these options into account, you've weighed the pros and cons, and a cash advance still seems like the best option for your situation, here are some things to consider before doing so. Make sure you know the fees, APRs, and limits for the cash advance. Only get one for the balance that you absolutely need. There's no reason to get extra play money out of this transaction. Don't get a cash advance if your credit card already has a high balance. This could negatively impact your credit score. Pay it back as soon as you can. Remember, there's no grace period here. And finally, try not to make taking out cash advances a habit. Focus on saving up an emergency fund to use in these types of situations instead. Believe me, you're gonna save yourself a lot of headache in the long run. Anyways, I hope you found some value in today's training. If you did, go ahead and like this video and consider subscribing to the channel for more. Again, there's gonna be a lot of other helpful content about personal finance stuff linked down below in the description if you need any more information about this topic. And for the simple dollar, I'm JD, and I look forward to chatting with you again soon.